I'm Brian. I'm one of the lead pastors here, and you just heard about the Alpha course. It is an incredible place. If you got questions, if you're skeptical, maybe you're not even a Christian, you're just kicking the tires, checking under the hood kind of thing, the Alpha course would be a great place for you to plug in. See, at Summit, we have this thing called our spiritual pathway. And in our spiritual pathway, we want to experience God, build community, and impact lives. We want to experience God in this large group gathering that we have throughout the weekend as well as online. We want to build community in small groups, whether that's meeting in a rooted group or a community group, step study group, and our student ministry groups, Awana, and then Alpha is part of that too. And we know that it's kind of hard to get to know people on a deep level in this kind of setting, and so our community groups meet that need. And so we want to experience God, build community, and then out of that, we want to impact lives. If everything that we learn about God brings internal life change, but we don't really do anything with that, that's not what we desire. God calls us to go into the world and make disciples. And so that looks like us going outside these walls, whether that's on a global trip or local serving, or even just going across the street to get to know your neighbors. And this is our spiritual pathway. It's more like a stream where we want people moving from kind of bucket to bucket. And if you've been here for a while and maybe you feel like you're stuck or in an eddy of sorts, I would encourage you, if you've just been coming on the weekends, man, sign up for a community group. Get into Alpha and see what God does. If you're doing all that stuff, but going, is there anything more? It's time to start serving and impact lives. This is what we desire for those that are calling this place home. Now, I had a thought during worship, and I wanted to share it with you. It's a little bit of an awkward thought, and it'll be kind of funny, I hope. But I was just thinking, we have our camera guys up here. Do you ever wonder, like me, if they're ticklish? Like, I just thought how funny. It'd be weird. I'd probably get punched. But can you imagine online? They're like, what happened? Earthquake? No, I got tickled. So these are things that go through my head, and I just wanted to share them with you. If you're new here, come back next week. So this is what happens. But anyways, hey, I grew up in Southern California. I'm a SoCal transplant, but I've been here since '05, so I feel almost native. And I know that might offend you native Nevadans that are more like unicorns anymore. And that's not the intent to offend. But I just want to call this place home, and so I just want to feel included. And you native Nevadans are like, man, you guys are awesome and rare anymore. So that's kind of how it goes. But I grew up in a part of Orange County in SoCal that was fairly rural. Like, I had a bunch of animals growing up. We had horses, and we had horse property. At one time, we had a few goats. We had one goat that showed up on Valentine's Day. I'm not kidding. It was walking up the street. We're like, there's a goat in the middle of the street. My dad said, go get it. So we went and got it. Turns out the goat was pregnant. So a few weeks later, we had 3 goats. And then one of them was a male and became really aggressive. So then my dad decided we have 0 goats. And I don't know where they went. I think he got rid of them to some friends or something. But the community I grew up in, they actually had horse trails everywhere. And we were free to do whatever we wanted, like ride our bikes. We had a golf cart, of all things. Like in 5th grade, my parents said, hey, go. And so we'd take the golf cart and just go in the community. And that's what we would do. And even McDonald's had a hitching post behind it, so you could ride your horse to McDonald's and eat there. And then I couldn't figure out how to lock my bike up on that hitching post, but my sister could attach her horse to that thing. But somewhere along the way, I heard about this organization called 4-H. Any 4-H people here? Yeah, all right, a few of us. So I joined 4-H because I wanted to hit the big time. I wanted to show chickens. That's a true story. So I convinced my parents that I wanted to show chickens because you could do that in 4-H. And so we had a chicken coop already, and we had chickens that laid eggs. And then we bought all these sort of ornamental chickens that were dumb chickens. They didn't even lay eggs. And before someone posts, chickens that don't lay eggs are called roosters. They were hens that didn't lay eggs really, but they were really they were designer chickens. And even one of them was this golden phoenix that was this enormous, it was a huge bird. And it had these spurs on the inside of its feet. And when you went in the chicken coop, man, that thing went just like alpha male you and come at you and try and destroy your shins with those spurs. I don't know how many times my dad was like, goosh, it's good, through the uprights with that bird. But I took this chicken, because remember, I wanted to show chickens. I took this chicken, amongst other chickens, to the Orange County Fair, and I showed this giant rooster. And by show it, I just put it in a cage because I was afraid of the thing. But somehow, I won multiple years Best Large Bird of Show at Orange County Fair. I am big time, right? Yeah, I peaked early, like 5th grade, and then I was done. So then after a couple of years of chickens that didn't lay eggs and having to wash them and then show them, it was dumb. I go, hey, Dad, what's next level? And I said, hey, let's get a sheep. Let's get a lamb. Because we had a horse corral set up with chain link, not barbed wire. We weren't the wild, wild west. We were just tame west. So we had chain link around it, and I bought a lamb because I wanted to show a lamb. That was next level for me. And so I bought this lamb, and we put it in the cage there, and I fed it, and it was cute, and it was innocent, and it started to grow. And then I found out in order to show the lamb, you couldn't have a fat lamb, so you had to walk the lamb. So now, walking a lamb is so far removed from walking a dog. Dogs are like, okay, let's go. And sometimes they lead you. Lambs, my lamb just laid down. So now I'm on the street dragging this stupid animal, going, why do I do this to myself, right? Like 6th grade, this is it. And then we took it to the Orange County Fair, and I showed it. And before you show a lamb, you have to clip it and wash it. And this is what we washed it in. I'm not kidding, okay? We washed it in wool white, and that thing went from like dingy brown to sparkling white. Like there was like the clouds parted and a spotlight on it, and you had to put on a welding mask so you could look at it. It was so bright. And I've heard it said with boat owners, the best day of a boat owner's life is the day they buy the boat, and then what? Some of you are boat owners or have friends that are boat owners. Just in case you're wondering, it's the same with lambs. The best day is when you buy it, and the best day is when you get rid of that stupid animal. So I got rid of it. I auctioned it off at the end of the fair, and then my parents were like, you want to do that again? I said, never, ever again. Why do I share that? Well, most of us probably don't think about sheep much, right? Like unless we're trying to fall asleep and we're counting them, we don't really consider sheep. And most of us probably don't think about shepherds much unless we're going to Louis Bass Corner and we want to know something about shepherds in our community. But these things aren't really front of mind for us in our day and age. But when Jesus was alive in the first century, shepherds, they were a necessary part of society. See, they were the guys out in the fields with the livestock, and they were the ones that provided animals for consumption and for sacrifice. And we look through the Old Testament, some of the biblical figures of the Old Testament were shepherds. Abraham, Jacob, Moses. Even this guy named David, who became King David, he was a shepherd. This is where he got really good with the sling as a young guy out in a field fighting predators away from his livestock. And that his accuracy with the sling became a necessary thing when he faced a guy named Goliath. See, in the role of a shepherd, it's threefold. It's to provide, protect, and guide. When you think about a shepherd, they want to provide food and water for their animals so that their animals survive, so their animals grow, so their animals are healthy. And this might mean that they have to move the flock or the herd from here to there, depending on what season they find themselves in. They're also there to protect their livestock. They want to protect their animals because their animals are their livelihood, and they're employed or own those animals, and so they want to protect them. This is why the Maasai people group in southern Kenya are shepherds. They raise cattle, and they have a club. It's about yay long. It's got a big knob on the end, and those guys are really good at grabbing that handle and zinging that thing at any kind of predator that would come towards their livestock, and that's why they always have that, or they have a stick as well for the same purpose. So shepherd provides, protects, and then guides. And shepherds want to guide their livestock away from danger. They want to guide their livestock towards green pastures or clean water. And the shepherd motif that we're talking about, in the Bible, it extends beyond the guy out in the field with the livestock. And God uses the shepherd motif to talk about the leaders of Israel. The leaders of Israel, the spiritual and religious leaders, were there to provide, protect, and guide God's people. And this is a weighty task. But we'll read a text from Ezekiel 34 that was written 600 years, 6 centuries before Christ. And we'll see how they were doing, how these shepherds of God's people were doing. We'll begin in verse 2. Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Yikes. Should not the shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the courage, you clothe yourselves with the wool and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak or healed the sick or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. It's out of Ezekiel 34. See, Israel's shepherds, the leader of God's people, they weren't doing a good job at all. And God tells them, hey guys, you're selfish. Like, you're taking the best things for yourself. You're not bringing health or healing to the flock. You have not searched for the lost. And the outcome of that is that my people have scattered everywhere, and in that they're living in defeat. You were supposed to provide, protect, and guide, and you have done none of these things, God is telling the shepherds of Israel. And this is 600 years before the birth of Christ that God is saying, listen, guys, I put you in charge, and you're not hacking it. And when Jesus was walking the planet, it wasn't like the shepherds over those 6 centuries figured things out and said, oh, we ought to do this. No, they were still not hacking it. They weren't providing, protecting, or guiding like God desired. And it's in that kind of context, that cultural context, that Jesus then says these words, I am the good shepherd. He says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, he's not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. And then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is hired hand and he cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Now, this is one of the 7 I am statements that Jesus makes in the book of John. And these I am statements, he's linking himself with God, coming out of Exodus, where God says, I am. And so Jesus, for the Jewish listener in the first century, would have been in essence saying, I, God, am the good shepherd. And so not only is he claiming to be God, but he's also linking himself to the realities of the Jewish culture because they know about the shepherds and how they're leading poorly. He says, I am the good shepherd. And when he does that, Jesus is calling out the shepherds of Israel. Just like Ezekiel called out the shepherds of Israel 6 centuries earlier, Jesus is calling out the leaders of God's people in the first century. And he's also saying or claiming his identity as the better shepherd. So when he says, I am the good shepherd, he says, guys, you're not hacking it. And guess what? I will do what God has called us to do as shepherds. I am the good shepherd. And there's a couple of activities that Jesus tells us the good shepherd is about. The first one is that he lays down his life. And the second is that he knows his sheep. And for us today, many of us here are Christians. Most of us are Christian. And we understand this idea that Jesus laid down his life. And I pray, go back to that other slide there. Next one. There we go. Jesus lays down his life for us. And I hope and pray that as disciples of Christ, whether you gave your life to Christ, you were born in the church kind of thing, or just last week, I hope and pray that reality never becomes old for us. We're going to look at some scripture about that. And then the second one, that Jesus knows his sheep. And I think this is going to speak to the hearts of some of us because we have a preconceived idea that Jesus kind of knows about us but doesn't really know us. Maybe we believe he doesn't want to know us because of who we are. And we're going to see how that is quite the opposite and draw us closer to the Lord. So Jesus, he says that he lays down his life for you and for me. You know, this follows on the heels of John 10:10, where Jesus promises us life to the full. Not life half full, not life kind of full, not life sometimes full, but life to the full. And the only way that Jesus can offer us life to the full is through his life, death, and resurrection. And I love the comparison that Jesus makes with a hired hand. He says, hey, the hired hand, he's just there for the paycheck. Man, he's not going to worry about the sheep because he doesn't own them. And so he's going to take care of his life over the animals. And so when the wolf comes, man, he's out of there. He bolts. And the hired hand is not the best shepherd. And I'm guessing that when Jesus was speaking and the shepherds of Israel, the Pharisees were there, they probably started to pick up what Jesus was laying down. Because earlier in the chapter, he talks about the thieves and robbers, and now he's referring to the hired hand that bolts. And I'm guessing they were picking up what he was laying down, and he's saying, hey, you guys, you're really not cutting it. Again, I'm the good shepherd who's willing to lay down his life for his sheep. And we have to understand, this is one of the greatest acts of love and devotion and service the world will ever experience. When we consider who the good shepherd is, who Jesus is, he is God in the flesh. He is the creator. He is the eternal one. He is the sinless one. And here we have Jesus in front of the wannabe shepherds of Israel and those listening declaring that he's the good shepherd and that he would lay his life down. Now, it probably didn't make sense for them in that moment, but you fast forward just a little bit and we find Jesus on the cross doing exactly what he said he would do. When we look through the New Testament, there's tons of scripture about the sacrifice of Christ, but I just want to share 3 with us. In Romans 5:8, we read this about the sacrifice of God or Christ, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God demonstrates his own love for us. Now, this is beautiful, and here's what it doesn't say. While God demonstrates his own love for us in this, while we almost had our lives put together, Jesus decided to die for us. While we were cleaning house and looking the part and polishing everything up so that it looked good, that's when Jesus decided to die for us. No, it says while we were still sinners, while you were still stuck in your sin, Jesus died for you. And what this means for us as a church is that we're going to welcome in lots of common sinners, you and me included. And what this means then for us as a church is this place is kind of messy. Like, church wouldn't be so messy if you stopped showing up as well as me. Like, an empty building really isn't a mess. And the relational kind of stuff that happens when a bunch of sinners get together, it's kind of messy. And so if we just stopped showing up, church wouldn't be a mess, but there also wouldn't be any church, would there? See, here's the beautiful part of this. God sees more in you and sees more potential than you think exists in you. And because of that, because of his great love for us, Jesus died for us, not because of how awesome we are, not because of what we have done, or because, God need us in his kingdom. It's no, you were a sinner, I was a sinner, and the Creator gave up his life for you and for me. Let me go to 2 Corinthians 5. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. This is powerful. See, on the cross, Jesus wore the weight of our sin. The broken pieces of who we are that we can't get right, can't get straight, how we mess up intentionally and unintentionally. And not just you and not just us here, the thousands that call Summit home, but all of humanity throughout time. I mean, that's just like an exponential growth curve on the amount of sin that Jesus wore. And so we have the sinless one, the eternal one, dying on the cross for your sin. Why? So that we can become the righteousness of God. And righteousness means a right standing before a holy, righteous God. We are in a right standing with God because of what Jesus did. And here's the incredible part. You know who you are. You know the things done in secret and the things done blatantly that go against God's law. And there are times where you, in your heart of hearts, say, man, I'm not righteous. But yet God sees you as righteous. Because when God looks at you, he's looking through you, at you with Jesus-colored glasses, and he sees righteous. And so although you may not feel righteous because of what Christ did on the cross, you are indeed righteous. That is the greatest news in the world. That God, again, sees more in you than we see in ourselves. In Romans 5, back to Romans 5. It says, consequently, just as one trespass resulted in condemnation for all people. This is talking about the sin of Adam. So also one righteous act, that of Jesus, resulted in justification and life for all people. For just as through the disobedience of the one man, the many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the one man, the many will be made righteous. So Adam sins. We read this in Genesis, and all creation fractures. And we suffer the consequences of that sin today, and we can't free ourselves from our sin nature. And so things are a mess through the activity of one man, but then through the activity of one man, Jesus, we are justified and made righteous. And this is the beautiful news of what Jesus did on the cross. This is what the Good Shepherd does, and it's more than the hired hand does. It just bolts at the first sign of trouble. Jesus said, no, I'm sticking around. And I'm going to lay my life down for my sheep. And this is the grace of God, his unmerited favor. And to be honest, when we think about the grace of God, it is irrational. It is scandalous. It is extravagant. It is shocking. It is outrageous. It's even unfair that the Creator would die for the creation. That the perfect one would take on our sin. But this is exactly what the Good Shepherd does. He lays his life down for sheep, and more than that, he also, or in addition to that rather, he knows his sheep. The good shepherd knows his sheep. John 10:14, it says, I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay my life down for the sheep. Church, one of our deepest desires is to be known. It is to be known and understood and loved. And not the kind of known that's like surface level. Like, remember in high school when you had that yearbook, and at the end of the year, and you're like, hey, will you sign my yearbook? And they're like, you're awesome, see you next year. And you're like, they know me. No, they don't know you. Like, if you ran into them now, they probably, well, no one would know me because I'm bald now. I used to have hair, but no one would know me. It's a sad reality in my life. But here's the deal. What we're talking about there is just an acquaintance. But we long for relationships where we are seen and can see the other. The kind of relationship where you can either talk all through the night or just sit in silence, but it doesn't matter because you are connected. The kind of relationship where you can share 100% of who you are without fear. And where they can share 100% of who they are. And there's this giving and receiving in fellowship and relationship. And there's a powerful connect that happens when we enter into that kind of relationship. And we all long for that, or looking for it, but many of us have yet to find it. I mean, we can be friends with someone for years and never go that deep. We can be married for years and never go that deep, but it doesn't change the fact that we are designed for deep and abiding relationship. And here we have Jesus telling us, I know my sheep. And this stands in contrast to the shepherds of Israel that weren't hacking it. And to raise the bar, Jesus points to his own relationship with the Father. He's known by the Father and knows the Father. And this moves beyond the sort of know that is kind of theoretical, or I've heard of this stuff, or based on this idea that I might have. No, this is a relationship that's based on experience, presence, and time in the trenches together. And there is no doubt that Jesus knows the Father and that God knows Jesus. I mean, just consider it as baptism. When Jesus comes up out of the water, God speaks from heaven. And he says, this is my Son with whom I am well pleased. Like, no one would argue that Jesus knows God and God knows Jesus intimately. Yet Jesus tells us the same intimate relationship that exists between he and God exists between he and his sheep, between God, Jesus and us. I think one of the best examples of this happens in the end of the book of John. Peter was one of the disciples. He was a fisherman, and he was also the kind of guy that was a ready, fire, aim sort of guy, and said things that resulted in his foot being inserted in his mouth. He makes me feel good about myself at times. But there was a moment in time where Jesus was eating dinner with the disciples. The pastor of me said, hey, Peter, I just want to let you know that you're going to deny me. And Peter says, no, I won't, Jesus. I don't know what you're talking about. Like the other 11 guys, kind of lightweight, they might, but not me, Jesus. And Jesus said, you know what? But tomorrow morning, you're going to deny me 3 times. And later that night, Jesus is arrested. And while he's being beat, Peter is in a crowd of people just trying to be close and see what's going on. And it's in that crowd that 3 different times he's asked, hey, aren't you one of his disciples? Nope, not me. 3 times he denies him. And on the 3rd time, he runs away. He runs away and he goes back to what he knows, which is simply fishing. And Jesus is hung on the cross and put in the tomb. And Peter's out fishing because that's all he knows. Trying to make sense of what just happened over the last 3 years. And boy, we thought you were the Messiah, Jesus, and they grabbed you and they beat you, you hung you. I don't know. So I'm going to fish. I clear my mind. And he's out there fishing, and there's a character on the shore that says, hey, you kind of think, no, throw your nets on the other side of the boat. Okay, so the fisherman does that, and he catches so many fish, and he looks on shore and goes, whoa, it's Jesus. The resurrected Christ is on the shore, and Peter, and it just, ready, fire, aim, jumps over the ship, the side of the boat, and starts swimming to shore. Now, this doesn't say this in the end of John, but I'm just guessing that somewhere along the Michael Phelps swim there to the shore, Peter went, what on earth am I doing? Because the memory of, I won't deny you, but I did deny you, floods back in. And probably guilt and shame. But it's too late because he can't get back in the boat. He's halfway to shore. So he pulls himself out of the water. And I don't know what it looked like to face Jesus in that moment. But I'm guessing Jesus was trying to make eye contact, and Pete wasn't. Hey, Jesus, how you doing? It's Peter, I made us breakfast. Let's eat. So they're sitting there on the beach eating fish. There's a fire burning, and I'm guessing Jesus on one side, Peter's on the other. So they can make eye contact, but Pete's just watching the rocks, watching the fish. Jesus asked him a question. Hey, Pete, I got a question for you. Yeah, what? Do you love me? Yeah. Yeah, you know, I love you. Oh, then Pete, I need you to feed my sheep. Okay, Lord, okay. Silence. Hey, Pete, I got another question for you. Oh, okay, what's that? Do you love me? You just asked me, I just answered that. Yeah, just indulge me here. Do you love me? Yeah, I love you. Okay, I need you to feed my sheep. Okay, Jesus. Silence. A third time. Piercing gaze through the fire, through the smoke. Pete, I want to ask you again. Seriously, Lord, come on. Do you love me? Jesus, you know I love you. Then Pete, I want you to feed my sheep. See, in that moment, Jesus saw more in Peter than Peter saw in himself. In that moment of shame and embarrassment, and he let Jesus down. Jesus didn't just, in cancel culture say, dude, you're done. He said, no, Pete, we're in this together. I know you. I know who you are. Yeah, I know you denied me. We made eye contact, bro. But I'm here because I love you, and I've called greater out of you. And I want you to go on and do great things. I don't want to leave you in this kind of hole of whatever that you've dug here. And Peter goes on. His first sermon of the church, 3,000 people come to Christ. Imagine if Jesus had said, yeah, I know him, but he's not one of mine. That's not what Jesus said. And the same is true for us. Like Jesus didn't walk away from Peter. Jesus doesn't walk away from you. And that's the greatest thing. He knows your strengths. He knows your weaknesses. He knows those things that you think about at the core of who you are. He knows those questions that you're afraid to ask because you may not like the answer. He knows what you've done. He knows your likes and your dislikes. He knows the areas of sin. He knows the strongholds in your life. And he knows what you can do. Heck, he even knows that time in 7th grade you laughed so hard that snot bubble formed and you hope no one else saw. And he still loves you. So you're like, oh, it was 8th grade. All right, you get what I'm saying. The coolest thing, the most radical thing, mind-blowing thing is that the creator of the universe knows you, and it's not the superficial, hey, you're really awesome in the back of your yearbook thing. It is, he knows you, and he loves you, and he sees greater in you than you think is even possible. Because he is the good shepherd. So let me ask you, if the good shepherd laid down his life for you, and he knows you, at the end of the day, what is your response to the good shepherd? Like, what is your response? For many, I see this in our culture today, and it crushes me because I know it's coming into this church. And not that we got a corner on the market on faith and theology, but I think we're a pretty sharp group. But here's this deal. There's this thing happening in our world that I just labeled cultural Christian, where they claim to be a Christian, but I would say they're not following the Good Shepherd. Where they claim to be a Christian, and they wear that label on their sleeve, but they follow popular culture and look more like the world. For the cultural Christian, they're known more for their political position than their theological position. That they're known more for what they hate than what they love. And they're known more for the things that they do instead of the holy life that they live. There's little change, little impact. And I would argue that a cultural Christian does more kingdom harm than good, because someone that's not a Christian can say, well, I do the same stuff. Why do I even need God? Ouch. So let me ask you, if we have this continuum, let's put that continuum up here. We've got the cultural Christian over here, and then we've got the sheep over here that's following the shepherd. Where would you place yourself on the spectrum? Because the cultural Christian over here is going to say, well, Jesus, the good shepherd, died on the cross for me and knows me, and so I just feel like I'm compelled by guilt or obligation to do some behavior modification. so that I look more like Jesus. But over here is the sheep that's following the good shepherd that says, I am so blown away with the fact that the Creator would die for me, and then he knows me, and then he breathes life into me and calls greater out of me, that I have no option but to respond, compelled by love, to look more like Jesus, to plug into community, to spend time in his word, to spend time in prayer, to say, I got sin issues in my life. That stuff needs to go. And by the way, if you're in Rooted and breaking strongholds either last week or this week, man, that is a powerful experience where we are following the Good Shepherd into some very vulnerable places where the enemy has had a stronghold in our life and saying, no more. I have to share a story about that. A few weeks ago, I had a lady come up to me in the lobby and say, hey, listen, on the last message, I was really struck by the sin and how our enemy's coming at us. And so I just want to let you know, man, this whole last week I've just been, and she put up a middle finger in our lobby to Satan. And I go, I love that. She goes, oh, sorry, to the lady behind her. But I thought, that is so, like, I don't do that. It's done to me when I'm driving, but that's a different story. But I thought, what a great, somewhat irreverent, but reverent response to our enemy and to the sin and the strongholds. Like, you got no hold on me anymore, so deuces. We'll go with that instead of the other thing. But if we're looking more like following the shepherd, man, we're inviting people in and saying, we got room for it. This is why we're building this larger building over here, because we say, we're not done. And we're impacting the Truckee Meadows. And just let me share the heart of this church and the heart of this pastor, is that we move from here to here. And I'm not saying that we don't ever bounce back. We do, let's be honest. Like, we got sin, and sometimes we miss it. But here's my desire, that as we gather in this place, as we experience God and build community, impact lives, that we are moving the needle continually and inviting others in that are a mess. We don't celebrate the mess, but we embrace the mess and say, hey, listen, it's messy here. But we got this guy that helps clean us up, and his name is Jesus. And so I'm not going to clean you up. You're not going to clean me up. Only he can. But as we do that, we're following the Good Shepherd that laid his life down for us, and he knows us. And I want you, as we leave this place in just a couple of hours, it's a long sermon. As we leave this place in just a couple of minutes, I want you to go out of this place knowing, man, God, Jesus laid his life down for me. That one is like the core of our faith. But the other one is that he really knows you. And God loves you. Doesn't matter what your story of conception was. It doesn't matter what people spoke into your life growing up or what people did to you. That does matter. But that doesn't change the fact that Jesus rather, knows you and loves you. See, Jesus, he is the good shepherd. But the take-home question, is he your good shepherd? And where would you find yourself on that continuum? And are you moving the needle? Are you moving the dial just a little bit? See, you're known by him, but do you know him? Are you being led by him? And if not, what needs to change this week? Now, for some of us, we may be here and joining us online, and you go, I don't even know the Good Shepherd. And I want to give you an opportunity to respond. So everything we've talked about is Jesus. He's God in the flesh, and he died on a cross to pay for our sin, in order to restore relationship with God, in order to make us whole, to give us that life to the full. And if you have not submitted your life to the rule and reign of Christ, I just ask you, what's stopping you? Because you're missing out on that life to the full that he offers, the best life possible. And you go, I don't know what it looks like to do what you're saying, to become a Christian, a disciple of Christ. Well, the Bible tells us that we simply need to believe in our hearts and confess with our mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, and we will be saved. And out of that, we begin this process of discipleship. So I want to help you take that first step. And so I'm going to pray and lead us. And if you want to say yes to Jesus, you can follow along with me and pray in the quietness of your heart. And then I'm going to pray for us as a church family as well. So would you bow your heads with me, both here and in your living rooms and online? If you want to say yes to Jesus, to the Good Shepherd who laid down his life for you and who knows you and loves you, just pray along with me these words. Lord, I come before you now. And I acknowledge that, Jesus, you are the Good Shepherd. You have not been the shepherd or the Lord of my life. So I confess before you now that I am a sinner in need of saving. And that can only happen because of what Jesus, you did on the cross. Thank you for paying for my sin. And in this moment, I give my life to you. Would you lead me? Would you guide me? Would you provide for me? Would you protect me? Would you help me to follow you? And God, I pray for our church family. Lord, I love this church. It is your church, God. And we just declare we're a mess because we're human. But our desire, Lord, beyond belief, is to follow after Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And I thank you, God, that as we do that, we overcome the messes. We are used for your purposes. And we experience that life to the full that Jesus promises us. And so, God, come and dwell in our gatherings, dwell in our hearts, in our homes, in our places of work, and use us for further kingdom impact as we follow after you. Thank you for your grace and your mercy. Thank you that you know us, you see more in us than we could ever see in ourselves. And you call us into greater. Help us then, Lord, to take steps closer and closer to Jesus. We ask this in his powerful name. Amen. Amen. Hey, church, if you made a decision today, if you're here or online, we want to connect with you. And so we'd ask that you would text the word Jesus to this phone number. We'll leave this up here for a little bit. We're going to connect with you and tell you about your next step, which would be baptism in a couple of weeks. And for the rest of us, would you go this week and look more like a sheep following after the Good Shepherd? Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.